shift for a police officer.
It started out as nothing.
It was innocuous. It was a little crime.
Can quickly take an extraordinary turn.
A simple traffic stop went stratospheric within 2 minutes.
Speed is 70 miles an hour.
He's outside the petrol station fighting with a little male.
A routine case.
You can start off with something and it can turn into something completely different.
Taser! Taser! I'm here from you!
Can suddenly spiral into a serious incident.
Then it switched. He locked the door. She knew that something was very, very wrong here.
Stand by, I think we're going to have a decamp. One got out with a baseball bat. There's a ton of cannabis in the car.
They were literally on a rampage.
Sometimes the most minor crimes.
I was looking for a stolen quad bike, found a lot more.
Can crack major cases.
We were now possibly looking at a serial killer.
Today on Big Little Crimes, a copper's instinct.
That doesn't look right. That's a stolen car.
Uncovers a major scam.
You want to make sure you're going to get the result. You want to bring that person to justice.
An anonymous tip-off.
It was rotting flesh that was in that unit.
Reveals one of the biggest ever cases of food fraud in the country.
The sheer scale was something to behold.
But first, some dodgy driving.
It's a bit suspicious that they haven't stopped straight away.
Leads to a career-defining bust.
It was certainly the largest drugs seizure that I'd made.
When nighttime falls, criminals use the opportunity to work under the cover of darkness. Weekends are particularly busy for police. And PC Tom Andrews is about to have a Friday night to remember.
This was one of the best results of my career.
This case starts as Tom is about to clock off after an uneventful shift in Nottingham.
Just sort of doing routine stops, keeping an eye out for anybody that might be causing an issue and things like that.
It's midnight, and he's been on shift for 9 hours when Tom spots a car that just doesn't look right.
The vehicle in question had 3 young lads in it, and the manner of driving in this car just sort of raised a little bit of attention. Through any set of traffic lights, they were generally speeding away from the traffic lights, driving a bit faster than the road would normally allow, so just pushing the speed limit a little bit. Just things that draw attention to themselves, really. And we made the decision, just once we got through this next set of traffic lights, to try and pull them over on the left, which is just a bus lane. Unfortunately, they chose not to stop. They just continued driving at normal road speeds for a bit, which obviously sets your alarm bells ringing a little bit, that why are they not pulling over straight away?
Tom's sirens have been on for over a minute, but the car is refusing to pull over.
We again signalled for them to stop, but instead they continued down here and then indicated to turn right.
What have the 3 men got to hide?
Once we stopped them here, we've both got out of the car and we've gone over to talk. I went to talk to the driver and she went to talk to the passenger.
Tom still doesn't know why they've taken so long to stop, but he soon gets a hint.
As soon as I've started talking to the driver, I could immediately smell a smell of cannabis from within the car. Immediately start setting alarm bells off. What have they got in the car? Are they just using it? Are they driving potentially under the influence of cannabis?
What began as a hunch about some suspicious driving is already escalating. But when Tom starts to search the men, things get even more serious.
And then when we start speaking to them, they're a little bit anti-police. They start getting a bit hostile. Once we started searching them, we've discovered that each of them has got between £300 and £400 in cash on them, which is quite a lot of money for a young person to be carrying around. And then within the car, we found a couple of wraps of MDMA. We then arrested the 3 occupants of the car.
Tom's gut instinct about bad driving has uncovered some potential drug dealers. But is there still more to this than meets the eye? Later, the police find more than they bargained for, as the investigation hits a whole new level.
We realised that we'd hit the jackpot.
In our next case, an anonymous alert of some dodgy chicken has environmental health gagging to catch the scammers in one of the biggest food fraud cases they've ever seen. For 30 years, Lewis Coates has worked in environmental health. He's in charge of ensuring the safety of our food.
What we are meant to do is essentially protecting the public from harm.
But after starting in the most unassuming of ways, there's one case that put people across the country at risk.
My team received some anonymous information in the form of a letter that came through into the council alleging that there was some unscrupulous activity going on at a unit within an industrial estate in Rotherham relating to meat products, particularly chicken.
Ordinarily, anonymous tip-offs like this wouldn't be investigated as a matter of course. But then there's a further development. Lewis is contacted by a ministry vet with similar suspicions.
He had come across some discrepancies in terms of what he believed was condemned meat disappearing out of the system and not being accounted for.
It's enough for Lewis to think there could be a small crime here worth looking into.
We devised the means of actually doing some surveillance in the area, which realistically resulted in an officer standing on a toilet, looking through a small window at one particular unit that had been identified.
3 weeks of nightly stakeouts reveal that the unit needs to be investigated, and fast.
The officers' reports that came back clearly indicated that there was something going on at this unit, but there was another 2 units involved as well. There was movements of what looked like food products going from this illicit unit to another unit, which was a authorised meat cutting plant that was just across the way in the industrial unit, but also products going around the corner to a pet shop.
There was evidence to suggest meat was being moved from this industrial unit to a meat cutting plant and pet shop. But why? Lewis needs to investigate further. This has gone from a low-level tip-off to a high-priority case.
That seemed to fit in with the tip-offs that we'd had about this unit. We decided that there was sufficient evidence there to go for a warrant. We got a warrant from the courts.
The team make their way down to inspect the units. What they discover inside takes the case to a whole new level.
The enormity of the problem hit us, not just from what we were seeing, but the actual smell of the place. One of our officers, she had to leave to vomit outside. The stench was just on a different level entirely. It was rotting flesh that was in that unit.
This is way beyond anything they'd expected.
We also saw boxes and boxes of bleach and boxes of salt. The fact that there's bleach and salt on site suggests that that meat is being cleaned to try and get it into a state where it can go for human consumption.
Incredibly, they discover more than 10 tons of foul-smelling meat.
What most people probably don't realise is that there are foods that are condemned. A good example of that is within the meat industry, where we have got slaughterhouses that produce meat ready to go into food products, a certain amount is condemned because it is a risk to human health. What should happen is it should get processed and go into the pet food trade.
But this putrid poultry is being sold into our food chain. The potential public health risk is huge. And investigators soon make another grim discovery.
At the back of the unit, there was a freezer that was just full of boxes of chicken and turkey breasts, all with official stamps on.
Official hygiene stamps are required to show that meat is from approved premises.
They'd actually got a box full of different stamps. So it was obviously something illicit going on. They were fraudulently stamping up the boxes to try and prove that they were from a reputable source. Obviously a lot of work to do. The next step was then to review what we had in terms of paperwork.
Could the documents seized during the raid shed more light on what's really going on?
So all the paperwork came in as though it was byproducts, looking as though it was pet food, and the meat was then going out under human food names. There was trade there all the way down to Brighton, all the way over to the East Coast, all the way up into Yorkshire, Nottinghamshire, the Midlands. There was a huge area that just from this one unit we could see that the meat was being moved out to different companies and different butchers in a large area, and vast quantities of it as well.
Lewis now realises the magnitude of this dodgy meat scam.
At that point, from what we had as a local issue where we're going to do a food hygiene inspection and get them registered, it flipped on its head and became something that eventually developed into a national scale conspiracy to defraud.
Later, the scale of the fraud gets worse, and so does the smell.
It's hard to describe the odour. It really is a rotting pile of flesh.
In our next case, a car-loving copper senses a stolen motor is just one small part of a much more elaborate fraud. For Phil Robinson, choosing what career path to follow should have been a piece of cake.
Growing up as a kid, my family had a local bakery business, and my initial sort of interest was actually to get into that business.
But Phil swapped baking bread for a life-cracking crime and has never looked back.
I enjoyed absolutely every minute of it. It was a really interesting, enjoyable career. You would go into work in the morning and you would absolutely not know what you're going to be presented with.
But it's what happened early one very ordinary morning that sticks long in Phil's memory.
We'd been having a number of break-ins in the area, so we decided to go out in plain clothes, patrol the area, have a look, see if we could find anything untoward happening.
But just as Phil and his sergeant are hoping to stumble across a burglary, their routine patrol is about to take a different turn.
We've been walking down the street, and this is when I saw the car.
Phil loves his motors. And there's something about this one that's caught his eye.
The radiator grille and headlights didn't fit in with the filler cap on the back of the car. The filler cap was from from an earlier model of car. So it struck me as a little bit strange. That doesn't look right.
It sounds like something and nothing, but Phil has an encyclopedic knowledge of cars.
I said, well, have a check underneath where the chassis number is, and I'll put money on it that where the chassis number is, there'll be some damage to it.
The chassis number is a unique identity code. Every car has one. If it's missing or damaged, the vehicle is definitely dodgy.
So he got down on all fours with his torch, had a look under and confirmed what I'd said, which was that the chassis number had been either tampered with or welded over.
Phil's hunch is right. The car's unique ID number has been removed. A classic sign that it's been stolen. So he runs a check on the Police National Database to find its owner.
Lo and behold, what we actually get from that is the house which the car was parked outside was also where the car was actually registered.
They're meant to be on the lookout for burglars. But Phil decides this new crime needs urgently investigating. And that means an early morning wake-up call for the owner.
Guy comes to the window, wondering what we want.
The suspect needs to explain how he came to be driving a stolen car.
At this point, we've got a stolen car. It's just a minor offence, bread and butter stuff to us. It's a minor crime. We're not at this point looking for anything bigger than that.
But this minor crime is about to take a major turn.
We did have some paperwork for it, which was a receipt for the purchase of it. He bought it approximately 2 years ago from what he considered to be a local reputable car dealer. He was completely gobsmacked that he's actually ended up buying what we're now telling him is a stolen car.
The owner's story stacks up, and he's released. Now the person they really need to speak to is whoever sold it to him.
The next stage in this line of enquiries is we've now got an address for a car dealer. We've got a receipt which suggested it was what would appear to be a legitimate business.
Phil traces the car dealership to a local farm and heads straight there to take a look.
We knock on the door and we speak to what is the car dealer's wife. She tells us that her husband has actually been arrested by, as she put it, us lot. Why didn't we know about it? He's been arrested for handling or dealing with 2 stolen cars.
The suspect isn't home and won't be back for some time. He's already serving a 2-year prison sentence. But Phil has a hunch that what he's in prison for could be just the tip of the iceberg. Phil starts the search for evidence.
Initially, it was just looking like a normal farm, but we found he had an office within the farm grounds where he ran his business from. We discovered in his office that there was a large quantity of paperwork.
Police seize the mountain of documents and the hunt for evidence begins. Soon, there's a breakthrough. Police discover a finance agreement for the stolen car. And that's just the beginning.
What we actually start finding are invoices for new body shells for cars. We also find some invoices for damaged cars. He's buying significantly damaged cars. We pick a couple and we check those on the police computer. And lo and behold, we find one of the reshelled cars has been stolen as well.
The paper trail shows the suspect's been buying written-off cars, fixing them up before flogging them on using fake details. He's ripping people off selling dodgy cars. Phil's hunch was right. This is a crime on a much bigger scale. Then, an informant comes forward saying there's even more to uncover at the farm.
We've landed on the farm with 2 diggers. What we do actually find are 2 stolen car body shells and a stolen body shell from a van.
The suspects tried to hide the evidence, but thanks to Phil's determination, the case against him just keeps on growing. And there is something else that's puzzling him.
We are finding spare keys for cars. Why has he got spare keys for a vehicle? If you sell a vehicle, you give the person the keys. Why are we finding a number of spare keys for vehicles?
These keys could be a sign of yet another fiddle. This is now much more than a dodgy car found at the roadside. What Phil is about to discover will blow the investigation wide open and uncover a sophisticated fraud worth hundreds of thousands of pounds.
We've now got this scam that's starting to evolve. We've got a pattern of stolen vehicles. How many times has he done this?
Later, the size of the dodgy vehicles gets bigger.
This one was worth around £60,000.
And so does the scale of the fraud.
This is a clever scam where he's using lots of different ways to get money.
We're heading back to Nottingham, where one police officer's suspicion leads to one of the biggest cases of their career. PC Tom Andrews' routine traffic stop has led to the arrest of 3 potential drug dealers. But when he gets back to the station, he's in for a further surprise.
Whilst I was booking the 3 young lads into custody, I was contacted by my radio by my colleague who'd taken the car back to the police station to let me know that she had found more drugs in the car hidden within a void inside the car. So at this point, we really didn't know what we had. We definitely had enough evidence to be able to realistically charge them with possession with intent to supply drugs. But we could only prove at this point that they were perhaps low-level street dealers.
This has gone from a case of suspicious driving to one of suspected drug dealing. But on what scale?
They had 2 mobile phones on them each, which is quite a common tactic for drug dealing. One that's their personal phone, and then their burner phone, which they use for drug dealing.
There's enough evidence to get the go-ahead to search the suspects' houses. It's turning into a long shift for Tom.
So by this point, we've been on duty since 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and then you can envisage in your head that you've still got 3 houses to search.
Minor drugs paraphernalia is recovered at 2 of the suspects' homes. Tom makes his way to the final property.
So, approaching, we didn't know what we were going to find. Obviously, we had a cursory search of the other rooms, but we mostly focused on this young lad's bedroom. On a desk, we've seen a car key with, like, a fob on it. That's sort of raised questions a bit, because obviously we've arrested him in a car. This fob was for a different make of car, so it obviously wasn't related to the car they'd been stopped in. So we decided to go and have a look around the streets nearby to see if we could find this car parked up, and if the fob would indeed unlock it.
It doesn't take long before they find what they're looking for.
We walked round this corner, pressing the key fob, we saw some indicators flash.
Why would the suspect park around the corner from his own house? Tom wastes no time in trying to find out.
We started in the driver's side and the front area of the car and just generally worked our way back until we got to the boot. And it was when we got to the boot that we realised that our luck was in. So it was when we got to the boot we realised that we'd hit the jackpot. Inside the boot were 2 boxfuls of business cards, and policing experience told me that those were drug dealer business cards. Essentially, they give them out to their customers. All they have is a phone number on, and the customers will know that they can ring that phone number and then they can have their drugs delivered to them. So we realised that we were onto a winner there straight away, that we'd found this was already additional incriminating evidence.
The suspects are in way deeper than he first thought. But that's not all. Tom spots a bag.
When we opened a holdall that was in the boot, we realised that our luck was really in. Inside a holdall, we found more MDMA, and we're not talking a small amount, we're talking quite a large block here. And it was at that point that we realised that we really had uncovered their stash of drug supply.
It's a huge quantity of Class A drugs. This takes the case to a whole new level.
Certainly finding the drugs was an absolute moment of elation. I contacted my colleague who I'd been with on the initial stop, just said, we've found a lot of drugs. And there was a massive feeling of happiness between both of us because our sort of intuition, I guess, had been justified from the original decision to search these lads and arrest them.
And Tom's long night has been worth it.
We'd seen the night shift come on and go home, and then the following day shift come in. But it made it all worthwhile because we got this fantastic result. We'd taken a large amount of drugs off the street. We'd taken 3 drug dealers off the street.
The drugs are taken back to the station and sent off for analysis. Tom waits to find out just how much the stash is worth.
And it came back to us that the value of what we'd found was some £12,500. The phones that we seized off them, we sent those off for analysis. When we examined the phones, we could see evidence of drug dealing on the part of these three young people all across the city of Nottingham.
Faced with a mountain of evidence, the three men all plead guilty. And Tom isn't about to miss their day in court.
Because of the success and the sort of personal pride that I'd had in the job, I actually went and attended the sentencing hearing on my day off.
They're found guilty of possession with intent to supply Class A drugs. Two of the men received jail terms of 18 months and 2 years. The third gets 2 years in a young offenders institute. A stop for suspicious driving has ended with 3 drug dealers taken off the streets, and one of the most satisfying moments of Tom's career.
Nobody's going to ring 999 and report a drug dealer because they're either the drug dealer or the customer. So it's always a different level of satisfaction when you come across a job yourself, and especially with such a good result as this.
Back in South Yorkshire, the food fraud investigation is about to take an unbelievable turn. A run-of-the-mill environmental health inspection has snowballed into a national food safety crisis. A small tip-off about a suspicious poultry factory has exposed tons of meat unfit for human consumption.
From the documentation and the nature of the meat that we'd found in the site, the green, smelly, vomit-inducing meat, we realised that at this very point we were looking at unfit meat getting into the human food chain.
The rancid meat is being sold across the UK. And the suppliers are using fake approval stamps to pass it off as fit to eat. Lewis needs to work out who is behind the illegal operation.
One of the elements we did draw out was the identity of the individual that was actually in charge of this operation at this initial unit. Really, that was the starting point of piecing together the string of events and the chain of people and companies that were involved.
The man volunteers himself for interview. He provides Lewis with crucial information to help navigate the mountain of paperwork and get to grips with the supply network.
But at this stage, we can still only make sense of the chain where it's going from his unit out into the human food chain. It's still a little bit grey around how it's actually getting in to his unit. We know a vague name of a company, this Kennels, got no idea where it is. We've got a vague idea that it's originating in slaughterhouses.
The man doesn't have all the details, but points them in the direction of someone who does. The owner of the industrial unit.
And this chap is also operating 2 companies. One as a byproducts company, which is pet food, and then one as a human food company. And that's where we get the switch. And it's simply one guy in his van picking up the meat and switching the names in the documentation.
It all amounts to a fairly straightforward food fraud. The man is brought in for questioning.
The second interview was really the interview that took it to a different level, because we'd got the evidence now. It was coming from the pet food trade and going through into the human food trade. At that stage, the investigation took on a completely different perspective. I was now investigating full-time a food fraud.
And the clock is already ticking to crack the case.
We had to be mindful that any food offences, we only had 12 months from discovery of the offence to where we could lay charges. So we were working to a very tight timeline.
The suspect provides the name of two companies, a pet kennels company and a meat byproducts factory. Lewis now knows where the rotten meat is coming from. He organises a series of strikes.
On the same day, we raided the big players, which was the byproducts company out near Newark, the kennels, and a series of cold stores within Lincolnshire and Nottinghamshire, where we knew that the meats had gone to be stored.
Seized papers from the kennels confirm unfit meat is being sent to the byproduct factory. It's crucial evidence. Lewis heads to the factory to see for himself what's going on.
We arrived on site. It's hard to describe the odour. The odour was the only thing on your mind. It was in your clothes, in your hair, in your taste buds, up your nostrils. The visual feast of horror that actually greeted us at that site was just on a different level entirely. A fetid mass of poultry meat at one end, which is green, it's oozing, it's fly-ridden. The stench is it's undescribable. It really is a rotting pile of flesh that we've got there.
But the scale of the food safety risk is even worse than the smell.
There was about 12 of these bays within the shed. Each of those bays contained about 20 tons of poultry meat. The evidence that we found at this bioproducts plant was really the clincher to prove that condemned meat was being diverted into the human food chain. But the documentation as well that we seized from this site demonstrated that it was condemned meat that was coming from the slaughterhouse, coming into this factory. It was then being boned, so the breasts and the thighs being taken off, and then that meat was being sent out to the kennels.
The owner of the byproducts plant is brought in for questioning, along with the boss of the pet food company.
It was very much a case of no comment interviews, for example. That would be a regular feature, and nobody admitting what was going on.
Lewis still has enough information to obtain warrants for a final set of raids on premises in London, Sussex and Lincolnshire. He's now taken down the entire UK supply chain.
We felt as though we had nailed it at that stage. From the evidence that we'd got, we thought we'd got a very, very strong case for success in court. We really couldn't understand why people would do this other than the profits in it. We believe that for that 3-year period that we laid the charges, that the gang made around about £2.5 million.
The trial lasts 4 months. Finally, 5 people are found guilty of conspiracy to defraud businesses by selling poultry not fit for human consumption. The ringleaders receive sentences totaling 18 years. For Lewis, what started as a minor tip-off about dodgy chicken became a career-defining case.
This case was the biggest food fraud case that's ever taken place in this country, and I've never come across anything similar again.
There's one final case to wrap up today. A stolen car racket is about to become much more. Officer Phil Robinson's instinct about a nicked vehicle has sparked a huge investigation into a crooked car dealer.
What started out initially as one stolen car is now starting to mushroom into something which is much bigger.
Phil's instinct is that there's more, and stolen cars might not be the only way he's cashing in.
There's a lot of finance agreements in these filing cabinets. And the one thing that did spring to mind, or did stand out in amongst all of this, there was actually quite a lot of finance on horse boxes.
Each horse box has been bought with a large loan from a finance company. And there are several different names on the loan agreements. But are they the horse boxes Phil spotted on the farm?
There was probably 8 to 10 horse boxes. We know he's doing something with stolen cars. Should we start opening our field of view up here and looking at other things?
Phil's gut feeling has been right so far. But with the suspect already behind bars, can his wife shed any light on who owns them?
The horse boxes belong to the customers that are using the stabling. So we're then looking at the finance agreements and comparing them to the registration numbers of the horse boxes that are being stored there. And everything seems, above board.
It could be a legitimate part of an otherwise dodgy business. But with all his years of experience, Phil never takes anything at face value. And it's not long before something else catches his eye.
My attention's drawn to this tatty-looking flatbed Transit. It's got no number plates on it. Why would the chassis plate be missing? Is this a stolen vehicle?
It might look like a scrapped vehicle, but he wants to take a closer look, starting under the bonnet.
We check the engine number on the police computers, and the engine number then relates to a stolen vehicle. The odd thing about it is it doesn't relate to a stolen box van, it actually relates to something that's been registered as a horse box. So again, I'm looking at this, no, this is a grey BT box van. It's still got the stickers on it. Never in a million years has this ever been a horse box.
Phil finds a paper trail of documents that reveal the suspect has cloned the identity details of the box van. He's then copied them onto a genuine horse box parked on the farm.
So what we're creating now is a story and an identity and a vehicle that actually doesn't exist.
But it does exist on paper. Phil soon comes across a loan agreement for £30,000 used to buy the fake horse box. But it's registered to a woman. Could she be part of an even bigger scam? There's only one way to find out, and that's to bring her in for questioning.
Transpires that she doesn't actually own a horse. And what she actually explains to us is she was a friend of the car dealer. She was approached by our suspect, and they've explained that they can't get the finance. And would she help out by allowing the finance to be put in her name?
She thought she was simply doing her friend a favour. All she had to do was sign the agreement, and he would take care of the monthly payments on the loan.
She doesn't think that she's doing anything wrong.
But what she doesn't know is the loan is actually being taken out to buy a non-existent horse box, registered in his name. That way, when the finance company release the money, it goes straight into the suspect's pocket. Phil knows the loan is only authorised once they've seen the vehicle. So how did the suspect con the finance company?
So what we've found it actually did do, he's used one of the horse boxes that's being stored on the farm. He's changed the identity, albeit superficially. He has used the chassis tag that he's taken off the vehicle that we found. He's had a nice, clean new set of number plates made up, and he's put the plates on that horse box that relate to the BT box van.
When the unsuspecting finance valuer comes to look at an expensive horse box, the vehicle identity details all appear be legit on paper.
And the finance company decides whether it's worth, you know, the £30,000. And if he's happy with the basic checks that he's done, he authorises the finance, and our suspect gets his £30,000 paid into the bank account.
It's a clever scam. The suspect has his money, but the loan still needs paying off. This is where it gets even savvier. After a few months of the suspect paying the loan off, he contacts his friend to tell her the horsebox has been stolen.
She's gone to the police and reported her horsebox stolen, as she's been asked to do. So once the vehicle's reported stolen, the insurance company kick in and they pay off the finance agreement.
With the loan balance settled, the suspect still has his 30 grand from the sale of the horsebox that never even existed. It's a very clever crime that only a very keen copper could uncover. And Phil's not finished yet.
We find out then that another of these horse boxes was financed by another of his friends. This one was worth around £60,000, and it's exactly the same story. The insurance company pay out the finance agreement, and he's left with his £60,000 for a vehicle that actually doesn't exist.
The fraudster's been conning finance and insurance companies, and even his own mates. And Phil estimates he's netted £500,000 in the process. Phil's now ready to put all the evidence to him. But there's still one thing that's bothering him. The mystery keys.
We actually identify a couple of cars that have been repaired with a new body shell, and we go and see those vehicles. And we find that he's got a spare key for this car that we're looking at.
Incredibly, the suspect always kept a spare key from each dodgy car sale, just in case he wants to pinch it back again.
So what he was actually doing was stealing cars back that he'd sold, changing their identity again, sell it to somebody else. So he'd actually done this 3 times on one car. Very clever when you think about it.
But it isn't enough to outsmart Phil. He's built a solid case against the suspect. Time to find out what he has to say.
So we've got him produced from prison, and we now sit down with him, his solicitor, and all this evidence that we've got from the various scams. He didn't want to engage with us. He didn't want to tell us what he's done. He didn't want to admit to anything.
It's frustrating for Phil. But after months of hard work, he's confident he's cracked the case. The man finally admits to theft and fraud. He receives 4 years on top of his current sentence.
This is a clever scam where he's using lots of different ways to get money. But we've proven a case. We've proven what he was doing. That was the best result we could have possibly hoped for.
What started out as a dodgy petrol cap filler ended with the prolific fraudster finally being caught out. Join us again on Big Little Crimes, when everyday policing...
It was just another day in the office.
...uncovers extraordinary crimes.
I knew she'd poisoned him. I just knew it. And somebody would have got away with murder.
And cracks major cases.
This started with a small piece of information and culminated in an international investigation.
From the 9-1, switch that over, that's the young blonde. I was at the West Coast, now I'm in the East Coast. Saw you when